Ever since I first called SAO the worst anime ever, many concerned viewers have reached out to inform me that no, actually, it's not. And yeah, I know. It was a hyperbolic title even when that video came out, and in the 3 years since then, working the seasonal anime beat has only exposed me to more anime that make SAO look like a masterpiece by comparison. But that kind of begs the question, what really is the worst anime out there? Well, starting today, inspired by I Hate Everything's Search for the Worst series, I'm gonna be running through ANN's list of the top 100 lowest rated anime of all time, not counting hentai for obvious reasons, to find the greatest mistake. And since we live in the darkest timeline and Handshakers, one of the most legendarily awful anime to come out in the last decade, somehow has a sequel airing right now, I think it's only fitting to kick this off by finally tackling a series that I clearly should have murdered with words a long time ago. Now, when talking about Handshakers, it's tempting to go all in ragging on the show's obviously terrible animation and production design, and don't worry, we'll get to those. But when you focus on those glaring issues, it's easy to lose track of the many, many other things that this anime does wrong. Take, for instance, its hot garbage paint-by-numbers story. Tazuna Takatsuki is a meek high school kid with a knack for tinkering with mechanical and electronic gadgets, which makes him his classmates' go-to guy for out-of-warranty repairs. One day, after cranking the bass on his class president's iPod headphones so high that the rumble makes her titties bounce, Tazuna heads over to a university lab to fix their air conditioner, because that's the kind of thing a university would hire a teenage hobbyist to do, and meets Koyori, a mysterious, unconscious girl who changes the course of his life forever, or something. I don't need to lay this out for you. A guy finds a girl in a hospital bed and then anime happens. Not that kind of anime, just anime. You know, they go to another world that's identical to the one they just left. They get superpowers and they have to fight other people with superpowers in a death game in order to meet God and get their wish granted, or whatever. You have already seen literally everything this show is about in other disposable battle-driven anime, and especially in generic fighting games. Aside from its titular gimmick that the characters' powers are activated by holding hands with each other, there isn't a single original idea rolling around in this show's misshapen moe blob head. There's a weak Babylonian theme going on in its naming conventions. The Handshakers battle in an alternate world called the Ziggurat with magical bullshit weapons called Nimrods, but that's about all it does to stand out. Well, okay, I guess it's also unusually toothless for a survival game anime. The unique rules of the Ziggurat mean that fatal injuries sustained there turn into paper cuts and bruises in real life, so nothing that happens in any of the fights matters in the long term. Alright, technically Koyori has to hold Tazuna's hand all the time or she'll die, and the same thing will happen if they lose a fight and lose their handshaker powers, but they're the protagonists, so you know that's not actually gonna happen. Especially when none of the violence they inflict on others has any consequence, and every time the show has a chance to play up the danger of them losing contact with each other, it immediately undercuts it. It's kind of like they took Mirai Nikki and sanded all the edges down, and considering that show is 100% pure edge, that leaves them very little to work with. To mitigate that issue, Handshakers is padded out with a lot of boring conversations and a handful of generic slice-of-life episodes, and every last second of it is insanely boring. Pretty much the entire second episode is spent just watching characters sit at tables and talk about the plot, and a solid third of the show's runtime is dedicated to mindless filler plots like Tazuna and Koyori getting part-time jobs or saving their class's school festival booth from a last-minute disaster. It feels like they wrote these episodes by filling in a school anime plot Mad Libs book, but the by-the-numbers writing is only half the problem. It wouldn't be so bad if any of the characters were even remotely likable or interesting. As it stands, though, they barely even qualify as characters. The show makes the mistake of confusing personality traits for gimmicks. You know the running gag in FMA where Ed gets mad when people call him short? Basically all of the dialogue in Handshakers is that. Tazuna, for example, can't resist a chance to tinker with gadgets and talks about every interaction he has in terms of gears meshing together. Chizuru is really happy, except when someone mistakes her for a kid because she's short, which happens every time she's on screen. Her subordinate Hayate is too polite to correct people when they mistake him for her boss, which makes her mad at him, and also happens basically every time they're on screen together. And then there's Kodama Awaza, a Genki wannabe idol who starts every other sentence with quotes from foreign dead guys in order to sound smart. And when I say every other sentence, I mean she does it 9 fucking times in one fucking episode.
第28代アメリカ大統領トーマス・ウッドロー・ウィルソンは言ったわ。運命の中に偶然はない。フランス皇帝ナポレオン・ボナパルトは言ったわ。ジェフリー・チョーサーは言ったわ。ブレイズ・パスカルは言ったわ。マクシム・ゴーリキーは言ったわ。
Canadian YouTuber Geoff Thew once said, "Thanks, I hate it." And the crazy thing is, Azawa's probably the best written character of the lot. After she's defeated, we find out the proverb quoting thing is really just a bit dreamed up by her bootlicking manager to make her seem more interesting, and she's actually just a regular Genki wannabe idol. It's not much, but her dropping the gimmick for 5 minutes after she's beaten is the closest that anyone in this show comes to character development. These non-characters are frustrating enough on their own, but it's only made worse by the fact that no matter how much danger they're in or what they're doing, none of them seem to be able to just shut the hell up for more than 5 seconds. Tazuna and Koyori's handshaker opponents are constantly spewing inane one-liners and bantering with them and each other, and on the rare occasion that everyone stops to take a breath at once, Tazuna or someone else will immediately fill the silence with their useless inner monologue. And I do mean useless. None of these characters go through any of the kind of serious emotional struggles or internal conflicts that would warrant this kind of navel-gazing. The most significant emotional arc in the whole show is Tazuna worrying for like 20 seconds about the fact that a girl who is obviously not his dead sister isn't his dead sister. And the fights don't have any degree of strategy that needs to be explained at all, either. These inner monologues only regurgitate plot points we've already heard and describe what we're currently looking at. It's like watching an episode of Dragon Ball Z where Goku is constantly saying to himself, "Wow, this guy is strong. He's putting the Earth in danger. I need to protect the Earth from him. He's strong though. Golly, I sure did punch him just now. Oh no, now he punched me." Handshakers is far from the only anime that has this problem of always telling even when it's showing, but it's more aggressive about filling that silence than even most bad TV dubs for kids from the late 90s, and it doesn't have the excuse that, say, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure does with its monologuing, because it's not based on a manga where readers need the thought bubbles to fill in the gaps in the action. On the flip side of this, Koyori doesn't talk at all for the first 9 episodes of the series. She mostly just stares off into the distance as crazy anime bullshit happens all around her, which can be hilarious. Essentially, every scene has its own built-in deadpan lolly reaction, and the rare moments where she just silently stares at Tazuna while he's sleeping are comic gold. But more often than not, Koyori's silence is just another annoying gimmick, because instead of providing a gap in the dialogue, it just prompts more jabbering as the characters try to communicate with her like she's a goddamn dog. What's that, Koyori? Little Timmy fell down the well. We better go save him, don't you think? Yeah, Koyori thinks we should go save him. Now, at this point you might be thinking, "Hey Geoff, that sounds bad and all, but at least there's no pedophile pandering or incest, right?" Oh, you sweet summer child. Anime finds a way. The final boss of the series is Professor Nagaoka, the former handshaker/lab partner of Tazuna's mentor Makihara, whose gimmick is that he has trouble, doing words good. Nagaoka's new partner is Mayumi, Koyori's equally mute 15-year-old twin sister, whom he has brainwashed into being in love with him so that he can fight alongside her. Admittedly, he is the bad guy, and Mayumi will also die if she doesn't hold someone's hand, so it could be seen as a necessary evil, and yet the show's ending implies that this creepy, fucked up relationship is actually a good thing, that it makes Mayumi happy, and that furthermore, her wish to God will be to one day marry the man who kidnapped and groomed her for her own good. So yeah, that's definitely gross. But to give the show a little bit of credit, it could just be chalked up to the unfortunate subtext of what is clearly a very poorly thought out story. That same benefit of the doubt cannot be given to the incest subplot between President Gainax and her 12-year-old little brother. That's all just text.
この間お風呂覗いたらちょっと弟のこと愛してるって変かしらね。
Look, handshakers, if I wanted to watch Boku no Pico, I'd kill myself, okay? And that's not even the worst thing about this story arc. No, Handshakers commits a much graver sin here. Bad shilling, which as a shill master is something that I take very seriously. President Lily and her victim Masaru's story centers around Masaru's obsession with Precious Memories, a real-world Japan-exclusive card game that lets you battle with waifus from other much better anime. An obsession that goes so deep that those licensed trading cards are the weapons that Masaru uses to fight in the ziggurat. I am dead serious. Good brand integration is a balancing act between highlighting a product's best features and using them to naturally further your plot. You want to weave the brand organically into your story, introduce it in a way that makes sense given who the characters are and what they're already doing. What you don't do is take a girl who will die in 2 fucking hours if she doesn't hold her boyfriend's hand and have her sit down to calmly watch a card game tournament while he's frantically searching the city for her. I don't think I have ever seen a more egregious example of product placement just taking over an anime storyline.
This is not how you make people want to play a card game, man. This is. Today's video is sponsored by Cygames and Shadowverse, a strategic digital card game for mobile and PC that is honestly one of my favorite things that I've ever gotten to promote on this channel.
I've poured countless hours and more money than I'd care to admit into CCGs, both physical and digital, over the years, and Shadowverse is one of the best I've played. Like many of its competitors, it takes advantage of its video game elements to do things like give your followers persistent hit points and let them summon cards that aren't in your deck, but thankfully it's not nearly as reliant on RNG as some of the other games I've played. It has a ton of strategic depth for experts to dive into, with a constantly updating meta thanks to regular patches and pack releases. It's also super generous with drops. You get 50 booster packs just for finishing the tutorial, with more available through events like the huge Mysteria Friends promotion they're running through the end of March, draft rewards, and single-player content. So if you know what you're doing, you can build a competitive deck without spending a cent and without too much grinding. But don't let all that talk of strategy and expert play scare you off if you're a card game newbie who just likes all the gorgeous anime art and wants to hear some voice lines from their favorite Japanese or English voice actors while they're playing. Shadowverse offers surprisingly meaty single-player campaigns for all 8 of its playable classes to help you get familiar with their unique mechanics, and Cygames sells decently priced and decently built pre-constructed decks that you can use as a baseline to learn the ropes of deck building and get a head start on your card collection. So if you've been looking for a good card game to play and all the other options just aren't anime enough for you, or you just want to play a good game in general, click the link in the doobly-doo to give Shadowverse a shot today. That's how it's done, Handshakers. Step up. But maybe I'm putting the cards before the horse here. You gotta learn to walk before you can run, after all, and you gotta learn to actually make a watchable anime before you can use it to sell things to people. Even ignoring the terrible writing, the terrible product placement, and the whole Shotokan incest thing, Handshakers is a hard show to watch, literally. Many baffling decisions were made in the production design phase of this show that make it difficult, and sometimes even painful, just to point your eyes at a screen that's playing it and process that visual information with your brain. Part of this problem is the show's laughable CGI elements. Handshakers has some of the worst integrated, ugliest 3D models I've ever seen in an anime. Yazzie and I are in the middle of watching Initial D Stage 2 right now, and the interactions between the drivers and their PS2 game model cars are more convincing in that series from 1999 than the interactions between the Handshakers and their Nimrods in this one from 2016. 2D characters move at 12 or sometimes 8 frames per second, while the weapons in their hands and the backgrounds behind them seem to be animated at 30. And between snaking chains, spinning gears, and particle effect smothered trading cards, those weapons never ever stop moving. This constant smooth motion clashes with the stuttery anime visuals and breaks the illusion of movement that the show is trying to achieve altogether, leaving you instead with the impression of watching an anime-style slideshow on a web page covered with GeoCities GIFs. And the background art behind all of that noise is no better. Handshaker's world is built in part from poorly edited real-world photographs and in part from CGI sets that wouldn't look out of place in a Steam Greenlight game. And I honestly can't tell you which of the two is uglier. The photo backgrounds are gussied up digital recolorings of what appear to be Google Street View screenshots with exaggerated lens distortion effects applied in post to disguise how awful they really look. The shots that utilize these backgrounds give off the distinct impression of wandering through the the streets of Osaka while blindingly drunk, which is, coincidentally, the state that the background artists appear to have been in when they slapped together the show's 3D CG environments. Almost every interior scene in Handshakers is rendered in computer-generated 3D by people who don't seem to know what the inside of a house actually looks like or how, space works. Look at any room in this series for more than a few seconds and your mind will begin fracturing as you try to comprehend how, say, the top of a closet can exist when it backs onto the landing of a staircase that's shorter than it, or why there seems to be a 2-foot gap between that landing and the rest of the stairs leading up to the second floor, or why the door to Lily's bedroom is just kinda pasted onto the wall instead of being set into a door frame, or why Professor Makihara has 20 copies of the same 15 books on his shelves, or how Nagaoka's chair is supposed to fit under his desk, or why the gaze of the great old ones is piercing through you, seen but unseen, hidden in the signal of your TV as it... Okay, yep, I looked at it too long. None of this feels as if it was crafted with any kind of intent or cohesive vision behind it. Rather, it looks like it was cobbled together from store-bought models, the anime equivalent of a Unity asset flip. And it really doesn't help that all of the models they bought look like they were lifted straight from the pre-rendered cutscenes of an early PS2 game with their flat, plasticky, unshaded textures. Nothing in these environments looks like it belongs with anything beside it. And that being the case, it should come as no surprise when I say that the anime characters in front of those mismatched 3D models blend in with them about as well as oil does with water. It's not like this kind of mix between CGI and traditional animation can't look good. From Fate Zero to Tales of Zestiria, Ufotable has proven time and again that in the right hands, it can be stunning. But the secret sauce that makes those shows work is the studio's compositing team, who spend countless hours tuning scene lighting, particle effects, and color grading in order to bridge the gap between hand-drawn and computer-generated imagery and blend them into a single cohesive picture. Gohans went for a cheaper, less, time-consuming approach with Handshakers. They threw god rays fucking everywhere and slathered the screen with rainbow vomit gradient filters. Because if you can't make the lighting on your characters and sets look believable, you can at least make it look consistently terrible. I could keep finding things to rag on here all day, like the rapidly moving clouds in the sky, which make it look like the city's constantly being bombarded with Mach 5 storm winds, but I think you get the idea at this point. From a technical perspective, Handshakers is an absolute mess top to bottom. Gohans is simply not equipped to handle their own visual style. But the embarrassing, overambitious CGI isn't really Handshakers' downfall. The bigger problem is what it enables. With almost everything but the characters themselves being 3D objects, Handshakers is free to move its camera around how, when, and wherever it pleases. And, you know that old saying, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should? Well, apparently nobody at Gohans ever heard it, because Handshakers uses 3D camera movement for every action scene, every establishing shot, almost every dramatic moment, and a good chunk of its dialogue scenes too. The camera doesn't need to be looking up President Lily's nose while she walks over to Tazuna, it doesn't need to circle around his back while she's talking to him, but it can, so it does, even though it creates an unnerving, disorienting effect for the viewer. Speaking of unnerving and disorienting, please enjoy this footage of Koyori sobbing as she invades your personal space. The loose animated style that's necessary for these 3D scenes is oddly reminiscent of the cutscenes from the CDI Zelda games, which is not something that any animated production should ever strive to be compared to. This lack of directorial restraint is felt the hardest in the show's fight scenes, where the camera swings about wildly, sometimes changing angles completely or zooming down entire city blocks and back again in less than a second. There is zero sense that these characters are really fighting each other in a physical space. It looks more like they're wiggling around in front of a bad screensaver. And that's if you can see what's happening at all. Depending on how you're watching the series, these fight scenes can render it literally unwatchable. And I do mean literally. With the camera flipping out and particle effects all over the place, any degree of streaming compression whatsoever turns your screen into a pixelated jumble.
I didn't just buy this Blu-ray for the sake of a one-off gag. I actually needed it to be able to watch the show at all. So move over, promise of uncensored titties. Technical incompetence is the new wave in Blu-ray marketing. Or maybe not, judging by how this sold.
After all, it's not like being able to actually see what's going on in this show improves the viewing experience at all. If you could strip away all of the technical issues, the stuttery, erratic camera movement, the animation errors, and the awful character acting, it would only make these 3D tracking shots nicer to look at. It wouldn't fix the underlying issue that this is bad cinematography and direction. It's not like the vast majority of anime, and films in general for that matter, limit their camera movement simply because 3D tracking shots are harder to do. Conventional static wide and close shots, standard camera moves like tilts, pans, and zooms, these things are commonplace because over the course of more than a century, filmmakers have found that they are often the best tools for the job in telling the stories that they want to tell. We have developed a whole cinematic language that is widely understood by audiences around the world. And maybe it's appropriate that Handshakers make so many references to the Tower of Babel because it tries its hardest to pretend like that universal language never even existed. To be clear, there is nothing inherently wrong with utilizing crazy unconventional cinematography and pushing the boundaries of what's possible in animation. In fact, I'd say it's a noble ambition. Rules are made to be broken, especially in art. But if there's no narrative purpose behind those decisions, if you're only breaking those rules to look cool, the end result will at best feel empty, and at worst, it will turn out to be a befuddling, incoherent mess. It really seems like Handshakers is only doing things differently for the sake of being different. And I guess the intent behind that is to make it seem like a work of strong creative vision that could only come from Go hands, but to me, the loud, confused, misdirected stylistic flourishes only scream that there's no real vision behind it at all. There are some things about the show that I do actually like. The motion graphics of classical Japanese paintings and random CGI koi fish that are projected onto the backgrounds in the ziggurat are distinctive and surreal, and I can genuinely say that I've never seen anything like them before, which is exactly what I want to see when a show is trying to take me to another world. It's just a shame that that other world has nothing else going on. It is basically just an empty city. And I think that some of the musical compositions in the OST are pretty damn catchy. I mean, none of them are used correctly. The main battle track is a smooth jazz number that wouldn't sound out of place as the walking around town music in a Persona game, so in a vacuum, I'd say it's not bad. But I keep having to qualify my praise for these elements because they don't exist in a vacuum. They're all components of a terrible anime with no proper sense of direction, and without that vision, they're inevitably squandered by poor execution. Handshakers is without question one of the worst anime I've ever had the displeasure of watching, and it might actually have been the hardest one to sit through. Quite often, it is laughably inept, but a little too much of its runtime is excruciatingly boring for it to really work as a fun, ironic hate watch. By virtue of being the first show that I've watched in my hunt for the greatest mistake, Handshakers gets to claim the #1 spot by default for now. But I've got a feeling that it would have made its way to the top no matter when I watched it, and it's gonna be the bad anime to beat for a long time coming. Or maybe I'm just hoping that it will, because I don't know how many more shows this bad I can handle. I want to say thank you once again to Shadowverse for being kind enough to sponsor this video. I don't ever do sponsorships for products that I don't really like, but it's nice to be able to shill for one that I really, truly love, and I'm excited at the prospect of seeing some of you basement dwellers online in the next few days. My username is Anime Pope, so if you destroy me on ladder or in an arena duel, hit me up on Twitter and let me know. Also, let me know in the comments below what the worst anime you've ever seen is and why. And make sure you subscribe to follow my quest for the greatest mistake, which I'm planning to continue on a roughly monthly basis from now on. I'm also planning to highlight some good old shows to balance out the bad, so if you're looking for more positive takes on anime I love, stick around, they aren't going anywhere. But I am, for now, at least. I'm Geoff Thew, professional shitbag, signing out from my mother's basement.